If you're not following me on Instagram, please do follow, because we are uploading many behind the scene pictures and videos there. Hit that subscribe button and bell icon so you never miss an update from Neela Bakure Tutorials. We have seen the various causes which resulted or which are resulting into the loss of biodiversity. We have also talked about why should we conserve this biodiversity. There can be a narrow spectrum view, or it can be a broad spectrum view. Now we are going to talk about how do we conserve the biodiversity. So this is the question that we are going to be talking about. How? That means, what are those measures, what are those processes by which we can conserve this biodiversity in our country. It can be applicable all over the world, it can be restricted to only India. So if we are talking about biodiversity conservation, then there are two main approaches. One is called in-situ conservation. In-situ is on site, and the other approach is ex-situ conservation, that is off site. We'll take an example to understand the difference between the two. In-situ means we are going to conserve where that particular organism is found or in its natural habitat, along with the natural habitat. So if we want to conserve a tiger, we are going to conserve the forest and the tiger. That means tiger in its natural habitat, which is the forest. We are going to demarcate that area, and that becomes our in-situ conservation. Ex-situ, again, let us take the example of same tiger, because tigers are endangered. Their numbers are becoming less and less because of poaching, illegal killing. So if we find that in nature, in situ conservation, if these kind of animals are not safe, then we bring that animal out of its natural habitat in captivity. We try to create similar type of conditions, but it is not the exact same natural habitat. Then that conservation will be termed as ex-situ conservation. There are various types of ex-situ and in-situ conservations. Now, in this category, that is in-situ conservation, which are those natural areas which must be conserved? So first are called hotspots. Hotspots are the areas which have high species diversity. Such areas which have very high species diversity, that will be called a hotspot. It has high degree of endemism. Endemism means occurrence of a particular species in a localized area. When a species is found in a small area and nowhere else. Like kangaroos. Kangaroos are found in Australia, nowhere else in natural habitat. So such species is known as endemic species, and this type of conservation will be endemism, or this type of distribution will be endemism. These hotspots, they are at a higher risk of being destroyed. So there is this risk also involved. Such areas will be termed as hotspots. So if we know an area where there is high species diversity, or very rich species diversity, and high degree of endemism. That means that area has some organisms which are found only in that area, nowhere else. Then those hotspots should be conserved as it is. So that will become in situ conservation. In the world, 34 hotspots have been identified. This is in the world. In India, there are 3 hotspots. And these 3 hotspots which are in India, one is called Western Ghat, the second is the Himalayan region, and the third is Sri Lanka and Indo-Burma border or region. These are the 3 hotspots which are there in India, and total the number is 34 in the world. And this 3 number which we have in India is a big number, because we know India's contribution as per the land is less, but biodiversity contribution is higher. And we have these 3 areas which have been marked as hotspot areas. So if we conserve the hotspots, that means we are conserving on site with the natural resource, with all the natural conditions, all animals, plants in that particular natural condition. Ex-situ we will take up later. In-situ conservation, we also include national parks, sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves. So what we'll do is we'll write all 3 together, and then we will also try to understand the difference between the 3. National parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves. In all these 3 categories, it is in situ conservation. That means all the organisms which are conserved, be it plant or animal, they are conserved or protected in their natural habitat. First, let us write down the numbers of national parks, sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves in India. There are 104 national parks. This is according to the new list. In the old list, the number is 103. So we have to remember that we are talking about the latest updated new list. Wildlife sanctuaries, there are 551. I'm going to write down the number 103 in old list. And here the number is 544 in old list. And there are 18 biosphere reserves. So these are the numbers of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves. National parks are controlled by the government, whereas wildlife sanctuaries are controlled by the government and private organizations. In national parks, there is no human activity. Which is allowed. No human activity like agriculture or collection of timber, nothing is allowed. Whereas in wildlife sanctuary, there is limited human activity is allowed. And in this limited human activity, there can be human habitation in the peripheral part. They can grow crops there, that means agriculture is also allowed. And the people who live in those areas, they are also allowed to collect timber and other forest products. So with limited activity. Whereas in national parks, there is no human activities allowed. Biosphere reserve is a larger area and which may include some national parks and some sanctuaries in it. So these are larger and may cover national parks and sanctuaries. And here the main idea or the main aim is to conserve all the flora and fauna, or in other words we can say here the agenda or the target is to conserve the biodiversity or species diversity. So these three are related because there is some kind of regulation which exists. Now, if you're talking about biosphere reserve in which there is a national park which is included, so the rules of national park will be applicable in that area, and suppose there is one sanctuary which is included in that area, so the rules which are applicable for a sanctuary would be applicable there. So it is just a larger area which is demarcated as biosphere reserve. National parks and wildlife sanctuaries, they have pretty strict areas, boundaries. The boundary of national park is very well defined, whereas of wildlife sanctuary, the boundaries are not that well defined. The reason is this human activity. So the people who are taking the advantage or using the timber and all, they live in the peripheral part. So there is no clear-cut demarcation of the boundary of a sanctuary. But the things which are common in all three is that they are in situ conservations, or they are the methods of in situ conservations. There is one more in situ conservation, and that is called sacred groves. There are various sacred groves also. So the sacred grove, which is one example of in situ conservation, and the other methods, that is of ex situ conservation, that we will take up in the next video.